Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.
She was on her knees, clutching her shattered palm to her stomach. Arena dust clung to her blue skin, working its way into the cracks of her wound, burning like acid against raw nerve endings. Her broken spear lay beside her, the once gleaming ceremonial weapon now nothing more than splintered metal and severed circuitry that occasionally sparked with dying energy. The crowd roared, their collective voice a physical force that pressed down on her shoulders. Lanaria had lost. As the reality of defeat settled over her, a memory flashed unbidden, the last evacuation of her homeworld. Her arms had cradled a child, one of the few younglings to survive the initial bombardment. The child's skin had glowed with the same blue luminescence as her own, eyes wide with confusion rather than fear. "We will find safety," she had promised, the words hollow even then. Minutes later, Imperial soldiers had torn the child from her arms. "Suitable specimen," one had noted clinically into a recorder. She had fought then, breaking the soldier's jaw before being subdued. That had been her first experience of the arena selection process, her defiance marking her as combat viable. The memory faded as the human champion, a beast of a man encased in an exosuit that amplified his already imposing physicality, stepped toward her with the practiced, unhurried gait of a predator certain of its kill. His ceremonial blade caught the harsh glare of the floodlights, creating patterns across the dusty arena floor that danced around her kneeling form. The edge gleamed with a blue-white intensity that spoke of molecular sharpness, made not for combat but for clean, efficient executions. The weapon hummed faintly as it cut through the air, a sound that seemed to quiet the crowd momentarily as they leaned forward in anticipation. Lanaria could smell the champion's sweat beneath the metallic tang of the exosuit. Human perspiration had a distinctive scent, sharp and alien to her sensory organs. His breath came in controlled, measured pulls, not from exertion but from the practiced rhythm of one who had performed this duty many times before. No heroics, just death, she thought. The idea settled within her with unexpected peace. No anger pulsed through her veins. No hope flickered in the dark corners of her consciousness. Her people believed that in the final moments, one could achieve perfect clarity, see the pattern of existence in its totality. She had always doubted this teaching, yet here, facing her end, she found a strange, empty calm. Her voice and her mind had gone quiet. So had her heart. She closed her eyes, feeling the grit of arena dust against her eyelids. She would not give them the satisfaction of fear, though she doubted anyone in the vast arena could discern the subtle differences between terror and resignation on a blue-skinned face. The sounds around her began to fade as though she were sinking underwater. The champion's breathing, the crowd's bloodthirsty anticipation, the electronic hum of the surveillance drones, all receded into a distant murmur. For a breath, all was stillness. Then came a sound that didn't belong, almost musical, thin, unreal, the hiss of an arrow. Lanaria opened her eyes just as the blade hovered near her face, close enough that she could see her own distorted reflection in the polished metal. The champion had frozen in his practiced stance, his expression shifting from confidence to confusion. Something twitched in his neck, a minute movement, almost imperceptible, and his eyes widened with the sudden realization that comes only to the dying. He dropped his sword. It fell with a dull thud, embedding itself partway into the arena dust near Lanaria's knee. A wooden arrow, handmade, rough-hewn, with stabilizing flights fashioned from what appeared to be scrap material, jutted from the back of his skull. Blood, startlingly crimson against the clinical whites and grays of the arena, began to seep from the wound, running in tiny rivulets down the back of the exosuit. The champion collapsed forward, narrowly missing Lanaria. He hit the ground with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. The impact raised a small cloud of dust that settled slowly over his still form. For the first time in cycles, perhaps for the first time in the history of these games, the arena went completely silent. Thousands of spectators, suspended in shock, created a silence so profound it seemed to have physical weight. Even the electronic hum of the arena system seemed muted, as though the machinery itself was stunned. Lanaria's gaze followed the arrow's trajectory upward, scanning the vast superstructure of the arena, searching for its source. Her eyes, adapted for tracking movement, caught nothing but the usual security drones and monitoring equipment, Yet somewhere in that tangle of steel and carbon fiber, someone had just changed everything. The silence lasted only moments before chaos erupted. Security alarms blared with piercing intensity. The crowd's shock transformed into a panicked roar as people began to stampede toward the exits. Guards in their distinctive red armor poured onto the arena floor, weapons raised, forming a circle around Lanaria and the fallen champion. But she wasn't pulled from the arena by the guards. He pulled her out. A firm hand gripped her upper arm, yanking her sideways into a maintenance shaft hidden behind a panel that had slid open in the arena wall. The panel slid shut behind them, cutting off the growing pandemonium, muffling the sounds to a distant rumble. "Move!" The voice was human, urgent, and unexpectedly ordinary. Her rescuer was simple, unremarkable in a way that would make him invisible in a crowd. He wore a worn mechanic's jumpsuit, stained with grease and marked with the insignia of arena maintenance. Welding goggles rested on his forehead, pushing back unkempt brown hair. One cheek twitched slightly from what appeared to be a nerve tick, a small, rhythmic movement beneath the skin. He was simple, unremarkable in a way that would make him invisible in a crowd. He wore a worn mechanic's jumpsuit, stained with grease, and marked with the insignia of arena maintenance. Welding goggles rested on his forehead, pushing back unkempt brown hair. One cheek twitched slightly from what appeared to be a nerve tick, a small, rhythmic movement beneath the skin that intensified whenever he glanced toward the arena walls. His name was Cade, he told her as they moved hurriedly through the narrow tunnel that smelled of copper and fire, the distinctive scent of the arena's underworks. Unlike the sleek, antiseptic passages above, these maintenance tunnels were raw, utilitarian spaces that few ever saw. "Why?" Lanaria managed to ask, her voice raspy from disuse. Prisoners weren't encouraged to speak. "Because what they're doing isn't right," he replied, his voice low and urgent. "I've been watching. You're the only one who refused to kill when you could have. Third fight against the Vordlak prisoner. You had him down, blade at his throat. You hesitated." She remembered. The creature had looked at her with intelligence, with fear, with a silent plea. The crowd had screamed for blood. She had stepped back. "I couldn't just keep watching," Cade continued, guiding her around a junction where steam hissed from pressure valves. His eyes darted away, a shadow crossing his features. "Not anymore. Not after what I've helped build." "What do you mean?" Lanaria asked. Cade's jaw tightened. "I designed the ventilation systems for the labs, installed the power conduits. I told myself I was just doing my job, that I didn't know what happened behind those doors." His voice grew bitter. "But I knew. The screams carried through my ducts. I just chose not to hear them." His hands trembled slightly as he bypassed another security panel. 3 years I worked on those systems. 3 years of looking the other way. Until last month, when I found a child's toy in one of the air filters. A small carved figure, looked like one of your people. He glanced at her. "That's when I stopped pretending." They moved deeper into the substructure of the arena, through passages that grew increasingly narrow and less maintained. Lanaria's wounded hand throbbed with each heartbeat, but she forced herself to keep pace. Cade seemed to know the labyrinthine tunnels instinctively, never hesitating at intersections, occasionally stopping to bypass security measures with practiced ease. She didn't trust him, but she walked, too wounded to resist, too tired to fight, and somewhere, beneath the exhaustion and pain, a flicker of curiosity sparked. Why would a human risk everything for an alien prisoner? After what seemed like hours, they reached a small chamber that appeared to be Cade's private workspace. It was cramped but meticulously organized, with tools hanging on wall mounts and parts categorized in labeled containers. A small cot occupied one corner. Multiple screens covered one wall, showing various feeds from around the arena complex. "Sit," he instructed, indicating the cot. "Let me see your hand." Lanaria hesitated, then slowly extended her damaged limb. 3 of her 7 fingers had been crushed during the fight. The chitinous exterior cracked to reveal the bioluminescent tissue beneath. Cade examined the wound with clinical detachment, then retrieved a medical kit from beneath a workbench. "I'm not a doctor," he admitted, "but I've patched up enough injuries to know the basics. This will hurt." It did hurt, but Lanaria remained silent as he cleaned, set, and bandaged her broken fingers. When he finished, he handed her a container of water and a ration pack. Standard arena sustenance, but she hadn't eaten in 2 days. As she ate, the door hissed open. Lanaria tensed, ready to fight despite her injuries. But Cade raised a hand in reassurance. "It's just Merrick," he said. "He's with us." A security guard entered, his uniform bearing the insignia of Arena Internal Security. He was younger than Cade, with sharp features and alert eyes that quickly assessed Lanaria. "So, this is the fighter," he said, removing his helmet. "Risky move, bringing her here." "Necessary risk," Cade replied. "She's the proof we need." Merrick shrugged. "Your call, but we need to move soon. They're expanding the search parameters. Won't be long before they check maintenance sectors." He tossed a security keycard to Cade. "This will get you access to the Eastern Quadrant. I've disabled the cameras along that route for the next 2 hours. After that, you're on your own until my next shift." "Thank you," Cade said. "We won't forget this." After Merrick left, Lanaria asked, "Why help me?" More directly this time, studying Cade's face for deception. Cade was silent for a moment, his hands busy returning medical supplies to their proper places. When he finally answered, his voice had lost its urgency, replaced by something quieter, more resigned. "I repair turrets, oil airlocks, map out maintenance shafts. I'm a nobody. Been that way my whole life." His hands stilled. "My father worked the arena before me. Never questioned anything. When I took over his position, I was the same. Just kept the machines running. Kept my head down." He looked up at her, his eyes suddenly intense. "But then I started noticing things. Patterns. Discrepancies in the prisoner manifests. Supply requisitions that didn't match the official number of combatants." He moved to the wall of screens, tapped a sequence into a control panel. The displays changed, showing archive footage, schematics, data streams. "Look," he said, pointing to a flowchart that appeared on the central screen. "Every alien who passes through the arena system, win or lose, vanishes afterward. Requisitioned. Processed. Those are the official terms." Lanaria stood, ignoring the pain that flared through her body, and moved closer to the screens. She saw combat logs, execution reports, facility schematics. A hidden pattern emerged from the seemingly disconnected information. A pattern of systematic elimination. "This isn't just blood sport," Cade said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's a filter, a slaughterhouse. They're using the arena to identify specific genetic traits, specific capabilities among non-human species. The ones who show promise are harvested." The word hung in the air between them, ugly and raw. "Why are you showing me this?" Lanaria asked, her mind racing to process the implications. "Because if you disappear, they'll erase even your name," Cade replied. "They'll erase everything you were. Like you never existed at all." He paused, then added quietly, "And I can't let that happen. Not anymore." Lanaria stared at the screens, at the evidence of a system designed to process living beings like resources, a system that had nearly claimed her. "What do you want from me?" she asked, turning to face him fully. "Help me expose it," he answered simply. "Help me make everyone see." They started small. Cade patched into forgotten communication lines, bypassing security protocols by exploiting maintenance overrides that no one had bothered to update in years. Lanaria, once her injuries had begun to heal, used her combat training to move through restricted areas, gathering evidence where Cade couldn't go. One night, as she slipped through the prisoner transfer corridor, she heard a struggle in one of the holding cells. Through the narrow observation slot, she saw a prisoner, a massive, four-armed Kryvax warrior, pinning a young human against the wall. The human wore a guard's uniform, but was barely more than a child, perhaps 16 years old. His face was pale with terror as the prisoner's hands tightened around his throat. "They killed my broodmates," the Kryvax snarled. "Now I take one of theirs." Lanaria didn't hesitate. She overrode the door lock and stepped inside. "Release him," she commanded. The Kryvax turned, surprise momentarily replacing rage. "You, the blue fighter, what do you care about this human whelp?" "He's not your enemy," she said calmly, though her muscles tensed for combat. "He's as much a prisoner as you are, just wearing a different uniform." "He guards the door to the death chambers," the Kryvax roared. "He is complicit." The young guard, still pinned to the wall, gasped out words through his constricted throat. "I didn't know what happened inside. They just assigned me." Lanaria stepped closer. "If you kill him, you become what they want you to be. A killer, a beast. You prove their propaganda true." Justice demands blood, the Krivax insisted, but his grip loosened slightly. Justice demands change, Lunaria countered, and change requires witnesses. Let him live to see what they've done. Let him become a voice against it. For a long moment, the Krivax remained motionless. Then with a grunt, he released the guard who slid to the floor, coughing and gasping. Your words better be worth his life, Blue One, the Krivax said. Lunaria helped the young guard to his feet. What's your name? She asked. Thomas, he replied hoarsely. Thomas, what you've seen here tonight, remember it. When the time comes, you'll have to choose which side you stand on. The boy nodded, his eyes wide with confusion and dawning comprehension. She left them both there, continuing her mission, but the encounter stayed with her. Change would require more than just exposing truth. It would require breaking cycles of vengeance, finding mercy in the midst of justified rage. She stole a camera core from the laboratory section, a tiny device that held the recorded memories of prisoners who had been processed. The footage it contained was horrific. Surgical procedures performed on conscious subjects, biological material. Harvested, test results meticulously recorded. Why? She asked Cade one night, after they had reviewed particularly disturbing footage. What purpose could this serve? Bioweapons, he replied grimly. Human-specific pathogens designed using non-human biological templates. The arena helps them identify species with particularly useful traits. Regeneration, toxin production, resistance to radiation. They're creating an arsenal. Days passed as they collected evidence, pieced together the truth, and planned how to reveal it. They slept in shifts, always alert for discovery. During quiet moments, they learned about each other, not through direct questions, but through the natural revelations that come from shared purpose. Lunaria learned that Cade had never killed, never fought. He was exactly what he appeared to be. A mechanic, a technician, someone who understood systems and how they worked. He had a mind for patterns, for connections that others missed. She came to recognize the subtle signs of his anxiety, the increased frequency of his facial tic, the way he organized and reorganized his tools when stressed. Cade learned about her world, destroyed in what humans called a pacification campaign, about her training as a sentinel, a protector of knowledge, about the vow she had taken never to take life unnecessarily, a vow she had maintained even in the arena, a decision that had ultimately led to her defeat. When they had gathered enough evidence, they made a single video, silent for the most part, just faces, fear, quiet dignity in the face of horror, the truth of the arena, stripped of spectacle and revealed as industrial slaughter. At the end, Lunaria stared into the lens, her large eyes reflecting the camera light, and said, "You see us. Now choose." 4 words, a challenge and a plea. The day of broadcast arrived, the day of the champion's ceremony, when the new arena champion would descend into the arena to claim the ceremonial weapons of his position. The entire complex would be watching, from the lowest maintenance worker to the highest Imperial officer. It was their only chance to reach everyone at once. Cade's hands trembled slightly as he connected the final circuits of their makeshift transmitter. "Once I activate this, there's no going back," he said. "If we fail, we're already dead," Lunaria finished for him. "We were dead the moment you pulled me from the arena." He nodded, took a deep breath, and pressed the activation sequence. For a tense moment, nothing happened. Then the screens around them flickered, showing the main arena where the ceremony was about to begin. The massive viewing screens surrounding the arena floor momentarily went dark as their signal hijacked the broadcast system. But instead of a fight, instead of the pomp and ritual of the champion's ceremony, the screens showed corpses. Dozens of broken, blue bodies, Lunaria's people, laid out on laboratory tables. Clinical images of dissection and extraction, footage of living subjects undergoing procedures without anesthesia. For the first time, the crowd saw that their entertainment was an execution line, that the spectacle they cheered masked a horror beyond imagination. "It's working," Cade whispered, his face illuminated by the glow of the monitors. "Look, they're seeing it. All of them." On the screens, they could see the crowd's reaction. Shock, confusion, growing horror. Imperial officers scrambling to regain control of the broadcast system. Guards looking uncertain, some lowering their weapons as they stared at the images. "We did it," Lanaria said, allowing herself a moment of hope. They can't hide it anymore. Cade's communication panel lit up with incoming signals. Others are joining in, maintenance crews from the lower levels, even some security personnel. They're opening access to restricted areas. For a brief, exhilarating moment, it seemed the entire system was crumbling under the weight of revealed truth. Lanaria and Cade exchanged a look of cautious triumph. Then, without warning, every screen went dark. The communication panel fell silent. The emergency lights in their hideout flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. "What happened?" Lanaria asked, her natural bioluminescence providing the only light in the room. Cade frantically worked at the dead panel. "It's not just our broadcast, it's everything. They've initiated a complete system shutdown. They're willing to cripple the entire complex just to stop us. Can you get it back online?" "Not from here. We'd need to." The door to their hideout slid open, revealing Marek silhouetted against the emergency lights of the corridor. Behind him stood a squad of Imperial security forces in full tactical gear. "I warned you it was risky," Marek said, his voice flat. "Should have stayed with your machines, Cade." "You," Cade breathed, realization and betrayal washing over his face. "You're the one who triggered the shutdown." Marek shrugged. "The Empire rewards loyalty and punishes traitors." He stepped aside, gesturing to the security team. "They're all yours. The commander wants them alive for public execution." Panic erupted immediately. Guards rushed to shut down the feeds, but Cade had anticipated this, activating backup nodes throughout the complex that continued the broadcast. Imperial officers screamed orders, trying to maintain control of the situation. The crowd froze, their celebration transformed into shock, then revulsion. Then someone, a maintenance worker in the lower stands, threw their weapon down on the arena floor. The clatter echoed in the sudden hush. "Traitor!" An Imperial officer's voice cut through the silence. He drew his sidearm and fired. The maintenance worker collapsed, a smoking hole in his chest. The crowd gasped collectively. For a moment it seemed the rebellion would die before it began. Then a woman in arena security uniform stepped forward. She looked at the fallen worker, then at the officer, her face set in grim determination. Slowly, deliberately, she removed her helmet and dropped it. Then her weapon followed, clattering beside the first. The officer turned his weapon toward her. "The next one dies too," he shouted, his voice echoing across the now silent arena. The woman didn't flinch. She simply stood, unarmed, waiting. The officer's finger tightened on the trigger. Another weapon clattered to the ground, then another, and another. Like rainfall, they began to fall. Dozens, then hundreds of weapons thrown by guards, workers, and spectators alike. Each person who disarmed themselves stood straight, eyes fixed on the officer, choosing sacrifice over complicity. The officer lowered his weapon, overwhelmed by the silent wave of defiance. Lanaria and Cade watched from their hidden position, scarcely breathing as the revolution they had sparked began to unfold. But their triumph was short-lived. The door to their hideout burst inward, knocked from its hinges by armored security forces. They poured into the small space, weapons raised. Behind them stood a tall figure in the ornate uniform of Arena Command. The High Commander himself, his face twisted with rage. "Traitors!" he spat, signaling his men. The guards moved with brutal efficiency. Lanaria fought, but her injuries had not fully healed, and she was quickly overcome. Cade never had a chance. A stun baton to the back dropped him instantly. They were dragged from their hideout through the maintenance tunnels and up to the arena floor. The screens still showed their broadcasts, though technicians worked frantically to regain control of the system. The crowd, now restless and uncertain, watched as Lanaria was beaten to her knees. Cade was forced down beside her, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. Before them stood the arena's High Commander, his ceremonial blade etched with ancient marks of office. He lifted it slowly above Cade's neck, his voice carrying across the now silent arena. "For disrupting order, for treason, for deception, the sentence is death." Lanaria struggled to her feet, pain shooting through her body. Blood dripped from her split lip, glowing faintly with the bioluminescence characteristic of her species. "He is human," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. The commander paused, blade still raised. "Yes, a traitor to his kind." "No." Lanaria stood straighter, facing him directly. "He's the best of you." The commander's face twisted into a smirk. Sentiment, he sneered, raising the sword higher, preparing for the killing stroke. But again, a hiss, an arrow, straight and fast. It knocked the blade from the commander's hand with impossible precision, sending it spinning across the arena floor. Everyone turned toward the source of the shot. On a steel beam high above the arena floor, a child, a human boy, no more than 12 years old, balancing precariously on the narrow support. He held a makeshift bow, strung with wire and welded pipe, and was already knocking another arrow. Lanaraya looked closer at the arrows in his quiver. They weren't simply handmade. They were fashioned from pieces of the arena itself, splinters of the ceremonial platform, shards of damaged arena barriers, even what appeared to be fragments of prisoner restraints, all transformed into instruments of liberation. "I saw their video," he called down, his voice high but unwavering. "I'm human too, and I won't stay silent." The commander snarled an order to his guards, pointing at the boy. Before they could raise their weapons, another arrow struck the ground at their feet. A warning. "You have your lasers and pulse rifles," Lanaria called out, finding strength in the boy's courage. "We have wood and wire, but we aim truer because we fight for truth." In that moment of hesitation, something in the crowd shifted. A murmur that grew to a roar. People began to move, not away from the arena as before, but toward it. Workers, attendants, even some lower-ranking guards, they poured onto the arena floor. A riot exploded. But unlike most uprisings, the crowd didn't run from danger. They ran toward it. They surrounded Lanaria and Cade, forming a protective barrier between them and the commander's forces. Throughout the complex, cells opened. Prisoners poured out, weaponless, but no longer afraid. Many were injured, weakened by their captivity, but they moved with the desperate energy of those with nothing left to lose. Cade, still dazed from the stun baton but conscious, began organizing the resistance. His knowledge of the arena's systems proved invaluable. He directed groups to secure key access points, to disable security measures, to free more prisoners. The corridors became a chaotic battlefield. Not all the freed prisoners followed Lanaria's example of restraint. Near one of the security checkpoints, a massive reptilian prisoner had cornered a group of young guards. His claws, designed for ripping through dense jungle vegetation on his homeworld, were equally effective against armor and flesh. "Traitors deserve death," he growled, advancing on the terrified guards who had dropped their weapons in surrender. "Stop!" Lanaria inserted herself between the prisoner and his intended victims. "They surrendered. They chose to stop fighting." "They didn't show mercy to my nestmates," the reptilian hissed, his scales flaring with rage. "Why should I show mercy to them?" "Because we must be better than they were," she answered, not backing down. "Or we simply replace one cruelty with another." For a tense moment, it seemed the prisoner would attack her too. Then slowly his scales settled. "What would you have me do with them?" "Confine them. Treat them as we wish to be treated," she said. "Let them see what justice truly looks like." The reptilian growled but nodded, directing the guards to a storage room rather than slaughtering them. As they moved away, Lanaria noticed Cade watching from nearby, his expression a mixture of admiration and concern. "Not everyone will listen to reason," he said quietly as she approached. "Then we keep trying until they do," she replied. "Or what was the point of any of this?" Their conversation was cut short as an explosion rocked the corridor. Imperial reinforcements had breached one of the barricades. The battle was far from over. Lanaria took a step forward but staggered suddenly, her injuries and exhaustion finally overwhelming her. Cade caught her before she fell, supporting her weight against his side. "I can walk," she insisted, though her legs trembled with fatigue. "Not alone," he replied simply. He shifted his position, taking more of her weight. "I won't let you fall." For a moment she allowed herself to lean against him, this human who had risked everything for a principle. There was trust in the gesture. Not just in his intentions, but in his strength, in his willingness to share her burden. It wasn't romantic or sentimental. It was survival, partnership, the basic truth that neither of them would make it alone. She nodded once, and together they moved toward the sound of battle, each supporting the other's steps. Their final stand took place in the heart of the arena. The Imperial forces, regrouping after the initial shock, had brought in reinforcements. Armored soldiers with energy weapons formed a perimeter, slowly tightening around the rebellion. Cade led a group that had managed to access the arena's environmental controls, creating zones of impenetrable darkness, flooding sections with harmless but disorienting smoke. Lanaria coordinated the prisoners, using their diverse abilities to maximum effect. Species that could see in darkness became guides. Those with natural armor formed protective lines. But despite their efforts, they were being pushed back. Lanaria found herself once again in the center of the arena, defending a group of wounded rebels as Imperial forces closed in. She fought with desperate intensity, but she was one against many. And again, she fell. A blow to her injured hand sent waves of agony up her arm. She dropped to one knee, momentarily vulnerable. An Imperial officer stepped forward, raising his blade above her. Again, a blade rose above her. But this time, something was different. The boy with the bow had made his way down from the rafters and was now fighting alongside the rebels. He had run out of arrows but still carried his makeshift bow. As Lanaria knelt, defenseless, he threw the bow to her, a gesture of desperate hope. She caught it with her good hand. In that moment, time seemed to slow. She saw the blade beginning its downward arc, saw the bow in her hand, saw an abandoned arrow embedded in a nearby barrier. With one fluid motion, she pulled the arrow free, knocked it, and drew back the bowstring. But again, an arrow. The third. This time it's hers, fired by her own hand. The arrow took the officer in the shoulder, a disabling shot, not a killing one. He staggered back, dropping his weapon, staring at her in shock. The momentary pause gave the rebels the opening they needed. They surged forward, overwhelming the remaining Imperial forces through sheer numbers. The battle for the arena complex raged for days. Imperial reinforcements arrived, but found themselves facing not just escaped prisoners and rebellious workers, but an increasing number of citizens who had seen the broadcasts and chosen their side. The truth, once revealed, could not be contained. 7 days after the initial broadcast, the last Imperial stronghold within the city surrendered. The complex that had housed the arena was no longer ruled by the Empire. Cade lay in a makeshift medical facility, recovering from injuries sustained during the final push. Lanaria sat beside him, her own wounds bandaged but healing. They had barely spoken since the fighting ended, both too exhausted, too overwhelmed by what they had set in motion. "We did it," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "No," she answered, looking toward the window where sunlight streamed in. Real sunlight, not the artificial illumination of the arena. "It's only begun." She stood, moving stiffly but with purpose, and made her way outside. A crowd had gathered in the square before the former arena complex. Thousands of beings, human and non-human alike, waiting in the bright morning light. Lanaria paused at the doorway, suddenly overwhelmed. Her hand, the one that had been broken in the arena, now healed but still bearing the scars of that fight, began to tremble. These people were looking to her for leadership, for direction, for hope. What did she know of rebuilding worlds? She had been a sentinel, a protector, then a prisoner, not a leader. Her breath came quicker, shallower. The weight of expectation pressed down on her like the arena crowd's roar once had. She felt a touch on her wrist. Cade standing beside her, his face showing concern. "I can't do this," she whispered, too quietly for anyone but him to hear. "I'm not what they think I am." "You already chose your path," he said, his fingers gently steadying her trembling hand. "When you refused to kill in the arena, when you fought to protect others instead of yourself, when you fired that arrow." His eyes held hers. "You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be honest. Tell them what you've already shown us." She took a deep breath, feeling the tremor in her hand begin to subside under his touch. "You chose," he said simply. "Now help them choose too." Lanaria nodded, straightening her shoulders. She walked to the center of the square. The crowd parted for her, falling silent as she passed. She stopped at a small raised platform that had been constructed overnight and slowly climbed the steps. For a moment, she simply looked out at the assembled faces. Former prisoners, maintenance workers, citizens who had joined the rebellion, even some former guards who had laid down their weapons when the truth was revealed. Then she raised an arrow, one of the wooden ones that had started everything. "This is not a weapon," she said, her voice carrying across the hushed square. "It is a symbol, a reminder that the smallest action at the right moment can change everything." She lowered the arrow, looking directly into the crowd. We are not things. We are alive. All of us, regardless of our origins, regardless of our differences. The Empire saw some of us as resources to be harvested, others as tools to be used. They were wrong. Her voice grew stronger, and I remember everyone who fell into dust, those who died in the arena, those who were taken to the laboratories, those who never had names in Imperial records. We will raise them, all of them, not as statues or monuments, but in the world we build now, a world where such atrocities can never happen again. The crowd remained silent for a moment longer, then erupted in a sound that was neither cheer nor applause, but something deeper. A collective affirmation, a promise. A year after the uprising, the planet officially changed its name. No longer Arena 13, a designation that reduced an entire world to its function within the Imperial system. Now it was Lancadia, named for the one who lost first, but never broke. In the central square of the capital city, where once the arena had dominated the skyline, a memorial was to be dedicated. Thousands gathered in the bright morning light. Former prisoners, maintenance workers, citizens who had joined the rebellion, even former guards who had laid down their weapons when the truth was revealed. Lanaria stood at the edge of the crowd, uncomfortable with the attention, yet understanding the necessity of ritual. Cade stood beside her, his presence a quiet reassurance. "They're waiting for you," he said softly. She nodded but didn't move, watching the assembled faces, human and non-human alike, united in something beyond mere survival. "My homeworld is gone," she said suddenly. "The Empire saw to that. But if even one of my people survived, scattered across refugee worlds or hidden in distant colonies, I'm obligated to find them." Her eyes took on a determined gleam. "We were the keepers of our world's knowledge. If I'm the last, then I carry everything we were. But if others exist..." "When you go," he replied, "I'd like to come with you." She turned to look at him, this unremarkable human who had changed everything. His nerve tick was still there, though less pronounced now. His hands, once stained with mechanical grease, now bore the calluses of construction work. He had helped rebuild what they had torn down. "Why?" she asked, echoing the question she had first asked him in the maintenance tunnel beneath the arena. He smiled slightly. "Because some journeys shouldn't be made alone." The crowd had fallen silent, watching and waiting. A small figure detached from the mass of people and approached Lanaria, a human girl, perhaps 10 years old, her clothes simple but clean. In her hands she carried something wrapped in cloth. The child stopped before Lanaria and carefully unwrapped her burden. It was an arrow, handmade with uneven carving along its shaft. The wood came from a root, twisted but strong. The fletching had been fashioned from a piece of fabric torn from what looked like an old jacket. "I don't know how to fight," the girl said, her voice clear in the silence. "But I made this for you." She held out the arrow. "It flies upward, not at someone." A pause, then, with childlike directness. "Like you." Lanaria knelt, bringing herself to eye level with the child. She took the arrow, examining it with careful fingers, feeling the rough texture of amateur craftsmanship, the sincerity in every imperfection. "Thank you," she said simply. She rose and looked out at the waiting crowd. Before her stood the entire spectrum of sentient life, humans in their diversity, reptilian species with scales catching the sunlight, blue-skinned beings like herself, mechanical technicians with their augmentations, children who had never known the arena, soldiers who had discarded their uniforms, all waiting, all choosing. Silently, Lanaria walked to the center of the square where a simple pedestal stood. She placed the arrow at its center, positioning it to point skyward. Cade approached, carrying a tiny bundle wrapped in preservation film. "We recorded the names," he said, his voice carrying in the hushed square. "Everyone who fell, those we couldn't find, those who never returned from the arena." He carefully unwrapped a small scroll, densely covered with microscopic writing. Thousands of names, each one a life, a loss, a memory. He placed it in a notch carved into the arrow's shaft. Lanaria secured it with a binding cord, her movements deliberate and reverent. Then she stepped back, making space for what would come next. The boy with the bow, the one who had fired the shot that began everything, stepped forward. His clothes were stained with ash from the rebuilding efforts, but he carried himself with quiet dignity. In his hands was the same makeshift bow, fashioned from metal struts and wiring that had changed the course of their world. He knocked the arrow to the bowstring. The crowd watched in perfect silence as he drew back, his young face solemn with understanding beyond his years. "For each who fell into dust," he said, his voice carrying across the square. He released. The arrow soared upward, straight, true, climbing higher than seemed possible from such a simple weapon. It rose above the spires of the rebuilt city, above the orbiting satellites, into the perfect blue of morning. And as the sun caught its tip, the arrow shined, incandescent, transcendent. For a breathless moment, the arrow was the only star in the daylit sky,